So next we have Jerry Murphy talking about compact development policy. So yet another piece in the toolkit for land development regulations, how you can sort of predict and provide for more intelligent ways to develop. So Mr. Murphy.
Good afternoon. Is University of Miami people still here? Go Gators. It's time for the rubber to hit the road. All right, do I have a pointer here? No, okay. All right, so the title of this slide is very misleading because this presentation has evolved working with Pam and Sandra. And so if you're not here, you may not know that the content behind this slide is really good. And you'll look at that slide and say, I'll skip that one. All right, so population growth in Florida, I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. And I don't think that those projections have changed any. And this is how we accommodate them, through building permits. So this is when we bought our condo in a coastal county in Florida. This is when it went underwater, figuratively. But the numbers are coming back up, and the 2015 numbers, 2016, 2017, 2018, all coming back from the Great Recession. But these are all single-family detached structures, and that's important because that's basically what we've been building in Florida for a very long time. So what we do is we take a vacant piece of property and we cut down all the trees and pile them in the middle and burn it, and then we scrape the land. And then we contour the land to put the water in one place and the sand in another. And then we come in with some infrastructure. And then a little more infrastructure. Sometimes the sidewalks connect, sometimes they don't. A little more earth moving. And we have to have green lawns. So we put the green lawns in. And then because none of the streets connect and they're all cul-de-sac, we have to put a bunch of signs up so we can figure out where we are. And that's our conventional practice. And so in Lake County, all of the different colored areas are areas that were entitled for basically 1,000 units or more. And this is just in recent development leading up to 2015. And the majority of the permitted structures in all of those areas are single-family detached structures. So there are other ways to do it. And this is where the compact design and development comes in. So we want to look at a little piece of property that is right here, a project called Restoration. But I want to point out that if you look at the green, the dark green and the light green, you know, this is sort of the geology of Florida. It's just a bunch of ancient sand dunes. You have high areas that are high and dry, as we like to say in the surveying business in Florida, at least when I was working in it. And then low areas that are not so, that are mostly green. They were probably the back bay at some point. Now they're a little elevated, and so they're filled in with trees and wetlands. So dips and dunes, and then when we get into a climate situation like we are now, more frequent water, rainwater, stormwater events, and so the dips become more wet and the dunes maybe not as dry. So this was the original layout for Restoration. You can see some connectivity in the areas, but mostly a bunch of cul-de-sacs and sprawling out over the entire piece of property. And what the University of Florida was asked to do was to provide an alternative, to keep the same number of units, same number of commercial space, but perhaps a different configuration. And so this was the alternative configuration. And so you can see all of those areas that are dips and dry areas on the east side have been preserved, and all of the units have been clustered and compacted into an area. And the main drag there running north and south is basically a multimodal transportation corridor. We call this the Vegas model. If you've been to Vegas lately, it's all internal capture. The last time I was in Vegas, I thought I'd walk from my hotel to the next hotel, which was quite close, I thought. And I'm walking, and I'm walking, and I'm walking, and there's no transit. It's internal capture. They want all your money in their casino and their restaurants and their hotel. So this is the same idea with compact development, internal capture. So you can have a 2.5 mile multimodal transportation corridor because people are going to stay there. Unless they want to go to the beach, then they'll go and drive to New Smyrna. But otherwise, the community is building all the things. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. But it's better than that. Okay, so we then quantified the aspects in the changes there. And so this is the first design, and you can see some of the costs, particularly the road costs. Millions, multi-millions of dollars for very different scenarios. And none of these scenarios are a multimodal scenario. Then we quantified the alternative, and this has the 6-lane boulevard with streetcar frontage lanes and parking. So looking at a much more compact development. And that's not even a consideration in the other model. And then we compare the numbers, and here's where it shakes out. Because all of these roads, this is just the cost to the developer. So this is the inspiration to the development community. Hey, you can make more profit or save money, or however you want to look at it, by doing compact development. All these roads have to be maintained. Once they're built and paid for, they have to be maintained. And that generally falls down to the local government or a CDD, and if the CDD is not successful, back to the local government. So we'll look also at performance with landscaping, those green lawns. So this is the standard, okay? We have green lawns. We have to mow them. We have to fertilize them. We have to kill the bugs that would kill the lawn. And then we have to water them. And so with the 2009 scenario, what we're looking at is a much more compact development of the lot, a lot less use of turf for landscaping, but still a large percentage of the area is landscaped. So the cost between the 26 plan and the 2006 plan, 2009 plan, again, this is in terms of carbon avoided, which is something that needs to be considered when you're talking about climate change and sea level rise. But these costs can also be quantified in dollars and cents. There's just a lot of savings that comes from not having turf and green lawns, or as much turf and green lawns as we do with single-family detached dwellings in the state of Florida. All right, so some of the evolving trends. So earlier you heard today from DEP, we know how to do this, and we do, And so here's some opportunities that are happening through a nod to our friends from Mecklenburg in North Carolina. Not in Mecklenburg necessarily, but in North Carolina. Much more compact development. This is the model of development that younger people are looking to find when they grow up and get out of college and want to live somewhere. So this is the type of market that is important to keeping young people in our cities and in Florida in general. All right, so quickly some policy considerations. We've been working at the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council on doing a project similar to what I think you guys are starting here, an initiative for regional sort of collaboration on resiliency. And we looked at all of the current literature in terms of policy considerations that you might want to consider in looking forward and developing changes to your comprehensive plan, including implementing the parallel flood requirements. I think in looking at these policy areas, and these are just a sample of what we've developed, you still want to do what they were talking about in the Army Corps presentation. You want to focus on your priority areas, focus on priority projects. So here's the policy areas that we've developed. In talking through our presentations with the parallel flood implementation in the Tampa Bay region, the home and shelter aspect came out of something that we hadn't found much of that being discussed throughout the literature. So that's a relatively new one. The rest are, many of these are indicated in the Southeast Florida Climate Compact's work as well, and they were one of the most resilient and most robust areas of exploration with regard to policy. So I've tried to give you some examples of goals and a few policies. Some of the goals are a little long, and so they only take up the whole slide. But again, the key focus here, involve business leadership. If you want people to understand a message, to convey a message, business has got to be part of it. They've got to be at the table. And funding mechanisms are always important. And so the public-private partnership that was mentioned by the Army Corps folks, that's something to really be thinking about in the future, particularly as the private sector becomes impacted by inundation. Public and private investments, again, hand in hand. And think about the economic integrity of the community. All those roads in that 2006 version of restoration as opposed to the 2009 version, a lot easier to maintain when there's a lot fewer of them and they're in more close proximity. You want to keep the community involved in the investment. So developers who come from someplace else and buy a tract of land and develop it and sell it and take the funds and go someplace else to the next piece of land, that's not necessarily community involvement, and it's not necessarily economic return to community. So something to keep in mind in terms of economic resilience. Regional collaboration and coordination, you're doing that today. I hope you'll build upon that. You want to strengthen that. You don't want to make the mistakes, as the Army Corps was talking about. Don't make the same mistakes over and over again. Learn from the mistakes that your neighbors are making. Try and establish that type of collaboration. And communications are extremely important. We know about this in the aftermath of a disaster. Communications are key. Well, they're key all the time. Keep the messages going, keep people involved. That business community should be helping in getting out the message and bringing the community together. and remember that sea level rise projections, as has been mentioned a couple times earlier today, are a moving target. And so you've got to keep updating this resiliency planning as new information becomes available, as new data is available. I think it's important also to think in terms of comprehensive planning strategies. Engineers, I think we've knocked the engineers a couple of times today. I don't know, they may be all left by now. But engineers talk about solutions. There really are not solutions today to climate change because it's a moving target. But there are strategies to make us more resilient, to adapt and be prepared for it. Risk reduction. So there's not a risk reduction element in comprehensive plans yet that I'm aware, but I anticipate it may be coming soon to a comprehensive plan near you. Sea level rise is inevitable. Storm surge comes and goes, but sea level rise, it's going to stay. It's going to stay through my lifetime. It's going to stay through the lifetime of our children. It's a very slow-moving process, and it's moving up, and that's the only direction that it's moving. So remember that that's inevitable and keep that in mind as you're trying to reduce the risk. And integrate those scenarios into all of the activities that you engage in on a regular day-to-day basis in your community. Social equity. So we want to try and utilize the effort that we're putting in to address resiliency, to address sea level rise, to sort of letting this rising tide lift all boats so that the folks who are less fortunate than some of us, we're looking at their situations too, because the lower income folks are often the service community, and in transportation issues, you know, they're often challenged. In tourist areas like this in most of Florida, we rely on it. It's a very, very important factor. So remember that restoration example and think about 3 lanes of multi-boulevard as opposed to many streets utilizing a lot of land. Think about economic mobility, not necessarily just getting around, but also moving up. And then finally, the last goal that we've got to talk about is water. And so water is the big thing. It's sea level rise, it's what we drink, it's how we get rid of things. You know, water is extremely important. And so a goal to manage our water very resiliently is mostly important. And just to close on the idea of water, if that's an interest to you, we're calling all the Gators home to UF, to the Wrights Union, on February 25th and 26th for the Water Institute Symposium. And so I invite you all to look into that, and if you need more information, you can Google Water Institute Symposium, or you can talk to me. Thank you very much.